And there we are. We should be live now. So this is the great fingers crossed moment where I wait for someone to tell us in the chat or somewhere that we are audible and everything is okay. But I can see myself on my screen, so that's always a good start. I guess if they can't hear us, they tell. Oh no, I can see words in the chat. Fantastic. So. Hello, everybody.
It's all working fine.
We are working fine, yes. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Beyond Screens Alternative Controller Show. My name is Alistair Aitchison, and with me once again is my co-host, Tatiana Vilela dos Santos. Hello, how are you doing?
Well, great as usual. You?
Yeah, doing well, thanks. It's warm and sunny.
Oh, you're lucky. It's not here. So, well, hello everyone. And in this show, we invite creators of out-control video games to tell us about their work and show us what they're working on.
Yeah, so for any of you who might be new to the world of alternative controllers, these are video games that are designed to be played using unusual game controllers. These might, for example, involve playing a game with a door stopper, or an electric guitar, or maybe a paper shredder. Or perhaps the creator might create a totally new play object by soldering together electronic components and using that as something totally new.
And today's our guest is Henrique Llagostera. Henrique is a game maker from Brazil, and he's working on a PhD at Concordia University in Canada. His work explores the potential of out controllers as a way to examine political themes. Among his portfolio is Cook Your Way. It's a game that uses a custom-made stove top as a controller, and it asks the player to prove their right to pass through immigration by cooking traditional Brazilian dishes. And before we welcome Henrique to the stream, let's see the game in action.
And I have the trailer queued up right here.
Wonderful.
Which, almost queued up right here. It's a bit off position. I had this all worked out great in rehearsals, didn't it? So here is the trailer for Cook Your Way. So let's welcome to the chat our guest, Henrique Llagostera.
Hey! Hello!
How are you doing?
Hi, Henrique.
Hi.
Oh, I've got the video looping. There we go. We're back to normal.
Okay.
How are you doing?
Cool. All right. Thank you.
So, Henrique, well, thanks first for coming on the show. It's a real pleasure to have you. And well, let's start right in the topic. Can you tell us about Cook Your Way?
Sure. Thank you for having me on the show. I really enjoyed the previous ones that I watched. Were really great. So Cook Your Way is a game about immigration and capitalism, and it's very much about playing with an immigration system. So talking in the sense of really exposing some aspects of these different systems through playing this game with this particular interface. So in it, you're a visa applicant that is asked to cook a typical dish from your country of origin to show that you can contribute to the country that you're applying to enter, and the judges tell you how you should be cooking it and how they are liking it or not, and basically ask you questions as you go through this process. And it uses the custom
Oh, there it is.
stovetop over here that I can show maybe in more detail as things go by, but that's the general idea. Yeah, and it relates a bit to this idea of like commodification of culture and kind of like the way that some discourses on immigration really reduce things to like productivity or to how you can like commodify your culture or different aspects of your culture, or kind of like essentialize it in a way. But well, yeah, that's roughly what the game is about and so on.
So from what I got, the idea is that you have to cook 3 recipes. Each recipe is a typically Brazilian recipe. This ritual is something that was at the heart, or maybe not, let me know if I'm wrong, but I feel like it's something that was at the heart of this idea of having an ALT control as a critical game, because we have critical video games already existing. I mean, that's a topic that's already like research, at least in game studies. And ALT control starts to be a bit research too, but the 2 of them, that's something that is quite your specialty. I mean, it's not common. And this idea of having the ritual, like physically doing the ritual, is something that was part of the experience you were aiming for, right?
Yes. I think like the gestures of it are really important, because I think that there is an element of like encountering this object. So you encounter this device and it has this like office like slick materials, the acrylic, the wood, and all these like this plastic and labels and everything. And it feels very like a very standardized kind of thing. And it asks you for standardized gestures as well, right? Like it asks you to do things in a very specific way that kind of paves over like the ways that you would maybe do this in your own, like in the actual context of preparing a farofa, couve, or a feijoada, which are the 3 dishes that you have to cook. And it also has this element of the embodied aspect of performing these gestures is also something that I really wanted to play with in the game, like this element of you're cooking, but it doesn't really feel like cooking in a way. Like it feels very unfamiliar. It feels like you're pushing buttons, and you are pushing buttons in a way. So it's kind of it's the idea to hold these contradictions together in a way. So it's a game about cooking, and you're doing something that looks like cooking, but it's actually not about cooking. It's a visa application. So that's this kind of like bringing, like stacking these things on top and letting some of the tensions form.
Can we say that the contrast between this facsimile of artificial cooking, in a sense, or this way of cooking that is, feels artificial, feels plastic, and the fact that you are not actually cooking but applying for a visa, is something that is conveying the message somehow, and could be attributed to something that is really related to ALT control and what ALT control games are allowing us designers to do?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there is like playing with this contrast, with these, with how these materials communicate things, or what kind of situation it sets up, and the way that games ask players to do things in very specific ways. And what is this relationship of control Like, are you controlling the game? Is the game controlling you to an extent? And this kind of how that gets built together, like by the video game and by the players. And I feel that there is also this, and it's something that I really find very interesting to think about the political implications of ALT controls, is the way that they can be kind of one endpoint into a larger system. So if we think of video games as like this huge system where we have like the manufacturing of the controllers, the circulation of them, the whole marketplace around games and around hardware, and about the ways that we learn how to play, how we get access to them, and so on. And ALT controls is our way to kind of change elements of that as well, right? Like, and kind of intervene in some of these points and kind of show like, hey, actually there is this whole like system around this. And making a game that it's about an immigration systems is kind of also a way of saying like, hey, immigration systems, they happen at very different places. They happen at physical borders. They happen at language test centers. They happen at visa centers and so on, right? Like, so all these different places where these systems are active, right? So playing with working through that, or letting people play with that through an alternative controller was interesting to me, because it's like, it's one element within a larger arrangement, and controllers are that as well, right? Like, if we think about the whole of digital play in a way.
I'd be curious to have, so I have my own opinion on the question I will ask, but why would you say that such an experience couldn't be exactly the same in VR? Why do you think that the physicality or tangibility of the object is somehow a support to convey the message you're trying to convey that couldn't be conveyed through VR, for example?
I think there's an element of what we bring when we are playing with tangible things. I think like the way that we are making sense of that experience is different, right? Like, then, for instance, like a VR game, like or a VR environment, because I feel that VR has this idea of privileging like this sense of immersion as like encompassing the senses. So you can't, in a way, like it's restricted the way that you can sense the environment around you, while at the same time sensing the environment of the game in a way. Like these are not so much like the links between them are not that explicit in a way. And when you're playing with this, like with this tangible controller, with this kind of device, it kind of creates a context around it, but at the same time, it's not like completely or like trying to block out this other this context, this environment around it. But there is and there is another element which I think is like, when you encounter like a VR headset or a VR controller set of equipment, right? It's an equipment that brings with it a certain repertoire, like a certain set of expectations on what you would be using, and this kind of like, oh, it's like this high-tech thing, and you look at it and you're like, at least I think that there is like a lot of discourse on how this is super innovative and how it's the future and so on, like this very futuristic kind of discourse around it. And it brings a certain set, like, not one specific one, like each person might bring a different interpretation of that, but it does bring, like, it triggers some kind of interpretation. And I think that creating the tangible controller in the case of Cook Your Way, part of the idea was saying, okay, so I want this to look like.
We seem to have lost.
We lost Enric
briefly.
Oh, it's the first time it happens.
First tech issue, so let's.
It needed to happen once,
Yes.
at least, of course. Especially because we are like crossing the whole world. We are on 2 different continents.
Yes. It has been fascinating so far. So let's see. Oh, okay. Enric seems to be back.
Enric,
Fantastic.
welcome back.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think
great.
the connection dropped. Sorry.
Yeah, the problem, it was
Um,
really just a few seconds. We were talking VR and how tangibility can somehow convey messages
yeah.
in a different way.
Yeah, and I think I was talking a bit about the materials like in of the controller, and I think that when you encounter it, like you bring a different the way that you interpret it or the way that you make sense of it will be different than encountering like this set of devices that in theory like could be used for like a variety of games and so on. Like it has this like um, very like exchangeable quality to it. Like it has to be versatile. It has to work with lots of VR games, and this one has to work with this specific one, right? So there is this idea as well. So yeah.
What I really like in Cook Your Way, because I'm asking you this question, it's a bit personal, but because it's a game I take as an example when I'm asked this question, like, why is VR not the same? Like beyond the fact that you don't have the tactile sensation, is it really such a big difference? And I think VR has this way, of immersing people. And the problem is that immersion and the critical thinking are not always compatible. Like you cannot be inside the experience and be immersed in the experience, and at the same time having the distance necessary for critical thinking. And with something like Cook Your Way, what I really like is that as you cannot have any expectations, as you said about it, you're not necessarily in a reflective state of mind, reflective mindset, because you don't know what people are trying to tell you, the designer, what they want you to do. And I like how, like, can we say destabilizing, like making people unstable and unstabilizing, destabilizing, shaking people this way is a really nice thing in Cook Your Way. I really hope there are more games like this that are trying to be critical and convey messages through out control.
That's really interesting because I really appreciate you saying that, because I think like there is this element of breaking with immersion, of like creating some distancing and kind of going like you go back and forth. Like yeah, at some moment you're very into the action, and like one thing while I was designing it that came up a lot was this thing of like how overwhelming it can be and how like all these different layers are there, and this kind of, and often the way that game design talks about attention, it's about like getting this the idea that you have to modulate this attention in order to generate maximum engagement in this kind of like very like a very specific kind of discourse, or you do this in a way that it's super consistent and that creates this very cohesive experience and so on. And sometimes this stands in the way a bit of provoking these breaks, of taking this, like I saw in the chat, and yeah, like it's very much like a Brechtian idea, like from, and also from Boal in the Theater of the Oppressed, this idea of breaking away from action, breaking away from the conventions of that specific medium, to take a moment to think about what it is going through, and actually like also recognizing that as you play, you're also thinking through this, right? Like these are, it's more about like creating contrast and moments for that, that center that a bit more in a way. So that's one reason why Cook Your Way has those intermission moments where like you finish preparing a dish. There is like the interview moment where like where the webcam and the interviewing system says like, oh, like answer this question, like you're done cooking, so now you can answer this, you can chat with us, and the chat is actually asking about you, like your work history or something like that. But using this changes in pace, it's also about like breaking away a bit with this like action centric kind of model of immersion, of like being fully into the action. No, like there is a moment for you to consider how the system is looking at you, right? And how it is judging you, how it is looking, how it is evaluating you, because it is an evaluating machine, right? Like this, and a lot of these, that there is this question of like a lot of controllers, how much they're evaluating the players as well, right? Like how they're like narrowing yeah, so.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We will move on a bit to, well, you know the show, so a bit to about your. We'll talk about your past now, and yeah, Alistair and I, as usual, we've looked through your portfolio, and pretty much everything I found with your name on it online. Your portfolio
Oh
is
no.
fascinating. Oh, no. And yeah, there is no trap. Nothing you don't already know. Like, so basically what I got is that so you were already like some years ago into, so first your background is in, your very first background is in IT, which is interesting, but you quickly moved on to social and communication studies, from what I got back from when you were in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I got that correctly. And what's interesting is that even back then, even before doing video game, you were already interested in topics that were politically engaged. So I saw you made like a short film that got awarded like, well, well, a winning multi awards of a time. It's called O Argentino.
Yeah, the
I'm trying to
Argentinian, yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it was already like kind of about topics that you're still exploring now. Is it something that already like moved you, something that you were always interested in?
Yeah. Oh, this is really cool that you brought that project up. I really like it. the the Argentinian is a short film about a man who is like a who makes fake documents for folks. So like passports and IDs and so on. And it's about like and it's about his own history of moving away from Uruguay. He's not Argentinian, he's from Uruguay, but Brazilians have like sometimes this confusion about like people who speak with a porteño accent. They're like, oh, okay, like, so it's probably Argentinian. But at the same time, like he left Uruguay because of the dictatorship, right? Like, and because of the repression to anyone who dissented or who fought or struggled against the military dictatorship in Uruguay. And he can't come back, so he doesn't feel like he can come back or that he can talk to people from that he left there. And it is a way, it is I am very interested in political themes and discussing politics. Like I feel like I was always involved in like student movement and different forms of organizing and so on since undergrad and before that as well. And so yeah, so I think like it's a part of my way of existing. So it kind of shows up in the way that I work, in the way that I play. And so yeah, that's and I think that the theme of immigration shows up a lot because it is connected with like family history of when my grandparents came to Brazil, as and also to about like when I went out of Brazil to study for the first time and then back again, this time to Canada and so on. So
it was
I
in
think
Copenhagen,
yeah.
the first time, and Canada, right? Yeah.
So these themes show up again and again.
Yeah, that's a good transition because in Copenhagen, your dissertation for your Master of Science Game Studies, basically, well, just to put it simply, it's kind of a game studies degree. And it was already about criticality in game design practice. So yeah, like you have a really consistent profile from the get-go. And you were a teaching assistant there, so you were involved in the academic field more than your average student. It looks like it, at least.
Like in in Copenhagen, there was like when I applied to go there, I really wanted to. So this question of criticality is a concept that shows up a lot in Brazilian theorists' work and pedagogue Paulo Freire, and his works from the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is about like a liberation-centered way of thinking through and acting in education that connects a lot of this idea of like practice and theory and action is always very engaged and based on dialogue and so on. And when I applied, I was like, yeah, I really want to work with this, connecting this with video games. There was Gonzalo Frasca's Video Games of the Oppressed thesis at the time that I was also interested in, and I really liked some ideas that were there. And I wanted to kind of think about like the process of game designing, how that involved criticality, and what kind of vision of criticality it involves, right? Like, is it like a view that is connected to critical thinking, or is it about changing the status quo? Is it about like resisting capitalism? How is these? What kind of criticality are we talking about, right? Like, it's almost like the games for change question, right? Change to what and from what, right? Like, it's a big question of like, what is it that you want to change? How can like, yeah, there is lots of questions there. And yeah, and TAing, like I was always super interested in education. And I got into games through like a student group that was studying games during undergrad. So I always believed a lot in like students like exploring their topics of interest and organizing to find their to learn together. And I think like TAing there was both like a way to get involved with education more, and also a way to relearn things that I had, like, well, I took the course and then I TA'd for the course. So it was a great way of like going through the topics again and developing them further in a way. So that was really cool.
I'll come back to this topic of the different type of criticality in game design, but let's talk about it with some games. And just to finish on let's say the past, how you kind of came to do ALT control. You had a job as an industrial game designer at Virgo Games Studio in Brazil back in 2013, where you were already thinking about, well, it was like serious games and educational games, so also kind of games with messages in a way.
Yeah.
Apparently. It was really hard to find some games from back then, to be honest. So we don't have images for that.
They changed their name afterwards. The company changed their name after I left.
That explains a lot. Okay, so, that explains a lot.
And they were really focused on like contract work. So they would like strike partnerships with like companies and or like foundations and work on creating educational and serious games for these organizations. And yeah, it was like it wasn't exactly the kind of work that I was mostly interested in a way. So that's why like I didn't stay that long. And also like I felt like I wanted to go back to teaching and kind of like doing projects on the side and working on developing ideas like in this, outside of that position.
When looking through your games and projects in general, so you tell me, but the oldest kind of ALT control games, a game I found in your portfolio was The Wise Head. The Wise Head Says, sorry. It's a local multiplayer game where players play with microphones. Was it like your first kind of ALT control game?
Yeah, and actually, like this is interesting. Like in a way, like when I started making games, like programming games and developing them, developing like digital games. That was the first one that I did during my master's, and and I wasn't thinking of alt controls then. That was just like I always enjoyed kind of different inputs to games, and this one in particular, the way that it worked was like two players played on the same keyboard, like arrow keys for directions for one of them, and A and D for the other here. But the jetpack would turn on as soon as there was enough noise on the microphone. So like you're racing to the top, but both of you, like both people could control the microphone at any given moment, right? By singing. And so it was very messy. It was very much about like this kind of hectic, like making noise and trying to push the other player into, and yeah, and that was 2011, no, 2010.
2010 based on Google.
Yeah, I think it's 2010. And then like at that, and actually like a few of the projects that I worked on during the masters ended up using different inputs as well. Like at the time, I didn't think of that as alternative controllers, but it was something that I found really interesting. So like AR, like augmented reality things, like computer vision. Yeah. So yeah, I think that was my first alt control game.
Yeah, innocent. So for the audience, basically the Wise Head Says is a local multiplayer game in which players compete to reach the top. And the only way for them to go up is by using jetpacks fired by singing, to put it simply. And then the next year, you did another experimental game, a Jewel in Limbo, which is also a multiplayer game with asymmetrical controls. One player has physical tokens, and the other one doesn't, I guess. And so this was your second alt control game, I guess.
Yeah. There was this. So this game, like one controller or one player changed the environment that the other player was playing in as like this first person kind of running game. They had to reach this giant wall in the background, but then the other player could move like pyramids or like a giant ball on fire that would jump around and things like that. And it would do this by moving these Lego blocks that a camera was tracking. And it was the first time that I used Unity, and it didn't work super well, but it did like have this element. The idea there was this idea of negotiating the rules of the game. Like, oh, is it okay for me to move the pyramid? Or we could in theory, like we could kind of decide what were the meta rules that we were playing by. But it didn't really work that way. People just wanted to mess things around, like, and just throw the giant ball of fire, move the wall around. So it was very messy, but it did work. Like, was an interesting. And I do think that it was a bit like, it had this kind of. I was really interested in this asymmetry as well, like players doing different things at the same time.
Yeah, there are two interesting things here for me. The first one is I feel like a lot of us started alt control with experiences that were more, if I can use the Kaiwa spectrum, more Padia than Ludus, like more physical, fun game, having fun, like doing stuff with our bodies, and not like intellectual, to put it simply, let's say not intellectual, like very reflexive and riddles and puzzles, and more like outdoor, almost sportive kind of games. Somehow I'm trying to explain Kaiwa in one sentence. I shouldn't have started this conversation. Anyway, I feel like this is what you were aiming for, and that a lot of us actually started entering this like this. Is it true, or is it just me having this perception and absolutely not true?
Well,
maybe it's
I'm
just
not sure.
me.
Like, I think that no, but I'm like, I think that at the time, like the key, the framing that I was looking at these games was very much from like this idea of the local multiplayer, right? Like the kind of dynamics that would show up from there. But at the same time, there is also something I think to me that was related to both like learning the different, like, I don't know, I think I was kind of always fascinated by like sensing and the ways that the computer can, that we can influence the computer somehow, or like that the computer can notice us in different ways. And so learning about these things was interesting. And I think that led me a bit to explore like this kind of more like full body movements or things like that, or even like, let's say like more, well, I don't know, like I think at the time I was more focused on this kind of this particular kind of physicality. But I do think that yeah, I don't know, I really, I don't think it's I think I don't see it as a general trend. I think like yeah, I feel like there are different starting points. Like I think it might be related more maybe, or like at least in my case, like I feel it's related to this kind of almost arcadey background that I had in a way. And yeah, but I do feel that maybe folks like coming from different like play traditions or different play communities would have a different yeah, that's
because
my impression.
Because in a duel in Limbo, the second part is that it's also interesting to see this kind of not trend, but way of making alt control, where we have cooperative, asymmetrical cooperative games, where one player is more focused on the digital part of the game and the other one more on the physical tangible part of the game. And so to use the hybrid media, I mean hybrid between digital and tangible, the hybrid media as a way to cooperate is something that actually there are not that much alt control games doing it, but I can think about 5-6 games on Check That Buttons going for that. It's interesting that you explore that so early in your career. I don't know if that's something that drove you at this point, or if you even thought about this way, but that's something that struck me when seeing a duel in Limbo, for sure. Yeah, keep talking and nobody explodes is kind of like this too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's one that, yeah, I agree. That's like a super interesting example of that. I think like at the time, I really like this idea of being one player focused on the physical and one player focused on this digital world, and kind of having these two. And that's kind of why they are in this limbo, like this idea of the limbo in the game was a way of kind of saying like they're both in the same space, like they're interacting, but they're interacting in this strange non-space of being like one in the digital and one on the physical. And this like very like separated thing, which is not really separated, right? Like a part of the whole part of the game is that they're not separate. But yeah, I think like it, well, one thing that I think is really important for, or that is something that I've been thinking about more, is the question of the time of game design practice. And I think that there is one thing that I find that I notice a lot, like in many out control projects, is how short some of them are. And like maybe like stemming from game jams, and some of my first games were like game jams, or maybe like a course assignment, or like exploring an idea in like 3 months maybe. And sometimes like I feel that it can be difficult like to create maybe like more games that center reflection more in a very, very short period of time. I think like there is something for a slower kind of engagement, because I think that maybe in slower engagements there would be there could be more time for conversations, for taking some things like letting some things ferment. I think there is like this sedimentation, and like the knowledge that you build as you design and as you engage with things, and making and engaging with folks as well, changes a lot throughout the process. And sometimes like having the process take longer, to me, was really generative, because then I could like kind of relearn and change what I was doing. So that happened a lot in Cookie Away, for instance, that I worked on for like, it never ends, but it's like it's been working on it for like almost 3 years in a way, and always coming back to it in a different way. And I think that this longer duration kind of changes how we engage with them.
I think you
Yeah.
raised a really interesting point there, and I mean, it's something, you know, in my own work I made a game with a paper shredder called The Book Ritual, which is meant to be slow and contemplative, and that is kind of designed to take place over like a 1 hour to 2 hour long stretch. But like I had to come up, you know, upon the reality that most people are not going to have 1 to 2 hours in a space where this game is, and with the isolation that allows them to sort of, you know, get into that. And I guess I wonder, like, is there an argument that, you know, is what's going on here is that a lot of alt control games tend to be kind of quite short in duration because they're mostly going to be shown in places where people only have a short amount of time to spend with it. I mean, what do you think?
I think that's a key question. That's one I really think that like a part of the PhD research that I'm doing is this asking of like, what is alternative about alternative controllers, and maybe part of that is asking also like how we circulate them, or how are they circulated, right? And there is this strong emphasis in events, right? Like in short-lived events, so things that last for like maybe a week at most, or maybe 2 days or 1 day, and so on. And many of these are structured in this very like almost like the idea of the arcade is very strong. So the idea that you have several different machines that you can go and engage with them separately, and almost like or that it's almost like a window shopping of the different games, and all these like shorter durations. And it's not to say that shorter duration games cannot be super meaningful or reflective. I think they totally can. But it does kind of like suggest specific ways, or like there is already kind of like, in a sense, there are different like repertoires of ways of making shorter games in a way that people kind of connect to that in different ways. And but I do think that changes a lot. And also the thing, for instance, so one thing is the shorter duration of the play session itself, but there is also the short duration of how often can you play this game, right? Like if I can only play this game once in my lifetime, right? Maybe the existence of this game or the significance of this game to me might be very interesting afterwards. Like the memory of it might be a more like have a bigger weight than my experience of that specific moment, and kind of like the way that I tell this story about like, hey, once I played a game that 3 dots, right? And this kind of how that builds, and I think that that's also something that that can be explored very differently, or that can be engaged with in ways that can be like both like more varied, but also more confrontational of what the status quo of digital games are, right? Like, because there is also the model of how digital games circulate, like being this product that you can just download and so on, right? And kind of how is that like an alternative model to that? Or
so it's not
like
it's not so much something that is intrinsic to ALT control, but more to how it's spread, how it's spread, sold in a way, or experienceable, and how it's made. It's often made in jam or in contexts where you don't have time to, like, we don't spend 3 years on an ALT control, except maybe if we think of games like Guitar Hero or games like this, but these are like an exception. It's not the norm in ALT control. So I guess it doesn't really count. And it's more due to how we work and how we can spread ALT control more than ALT control as a format. Because as a format, as we said earlier, as we embody the game, somehow it's more impactful, I guess. I mean, if I come back to Guitar Hero, these are the memories that are the most vivid in my mind. And I think it's because I have this in my muscle memory, in a sense. So it's more about the format, but there's maybe place for games like in the chat, people were asking, is there some durational games, if we have examples of this? And I was thinking of Boulevard d'Esca, which is a game that is in a street in France, and it will stay there forever. So you can go in the street and play the game, and it will be there forever. You can spend hours or never go back again. Maybe there is room for experiences like this.
Yeah, I think there is like this experimentation with time scales and kind of like the so Jess has Jess Marcotte has this game called Unlock and Pack that has this suitcase, and things there kind of carry over from one play session to another play session, and this kind of accretes and it has this kind of layering of the experience of the people that went before you when they play the game. And I think that that's a really fascinating way also of thinking of durations, right? And kind of thinking of how do these layer, right? Like how the existence of this game kind of has this life cycle, right? And
So
and in a way, like
I guess as if the time
so things like let's.
Oh, sorry. No, carry on.
No, go for it.
No, I was guess so.
Go for
Like
it.
you know, it doesn't. The time scale of a game, the duration of a game, is not necessarily the time that someone physically spends with it. It's also the history of all interactions that have come before and all interactions that will come after. So, like,
yeah,
I guess building that story into the game, is that what you're getting at? Sort of making that history part of the experience.
I think that there are like, yeah, I think in a way, like, I really like this idea by Patrick Lemieux and Stephanie Bullock of the meta games, of like the things that people do with games, and like how playing them is one specific meta game, and different ways of playing are each one their own specific meta games, and like modding and so on, like this all like kind of become other ways or other meta games. And I think that there is the one play session game, there is the multiple play session games, there is when the game becomes a habit, when the game becomes something that like you pass on to other person or something like that, right? Like I feel like and how they form communities, right? And these are all about the duration of games as well. So and I think that that's something that that can be tricky when we think about like short duration events, for instance, like out controls that's circulating only on short duration events, for instance, because it can be tricky to create these different engagements, right? Like it's because of several different constraints, right? Like from geographical circulation, the size of things, and money and so on, right?
Yeah, the chat is raising this point that the context is also something that we can take into account in out control games that we don't necessarily or not at all take into account when we do digital games, because I guess the point is to immerse players into a digital space. So whatever the physical environment is, your point is for the player to ignore it. So of course you have to take into account that Candy Crush will be played in the subway, for example. So there is some context to take into account in digital games too, of course. That's not what I'm saying, but I guess in out control, there is much more to take into account. Like the Amaze Festival and IndieCade is not the same type of event as a contemporary art festival where there is some out control games too. Is that something that you worked on?
I'm moving more into that in a way. I feel like the question of circulation is becoming more and more central, I think, to me. And both the way that the games travel and the people that make them can travel or not, right? And where they're happening in a way, and who gets to make them and who gets to play them. And I think these are all questions that that I think are becoming more and more central to me. And so I've been looking a lot into DIY, and this is also part of why I'm super interested in like gathering resources about how to make things and making that kind of resource more approachable, more easily accessible, and so on. Because of this, right? Because of this question of like, how do things circulate? Well, what are the conditions of making them? And yeah, so that's why I've been looking a lot into like smartphones and a lot about like off-the-shelf electronics. So I was super excited about like the Amaze at Home Jam, for instance.
Oh
It was
yeah.
super interesting about like making alt controls at home. I think that's a super interesting approach, and I think that's also part of this like there's different ways that out control games can circulate and get made, right? Like they can change from like if they exist at home or if they exist within a community, like, or if they exist for like in specific moments in time, or if like I really think that's an interesting venue for things to happen. I think it also connects to the very central question of like hardware and what is gaming hardware, right? Like, well, what are video game hardware, and what is involved in them in terms of their production, in terms of their design, how inaccessible they can be, and how they are inaccessible, how like all the materials that go into them, the labor practices that go into them, and all these like piles of different tensions that are there, right? And so things to I think out controls is one way that we can think about and come up with different kind of arrangements. So yeah, and
that's interesting because
hardware.
When I started the Alt Control at Home Jam and later on the Amaze Alt Control at Home Jam, I didn't realize that. So my point was to basically bring playful. So of course it was related to COVID, and that's obvious, but also to have a playful look on your daily objects and daily environment. And when researching your portfolio and such for this show, I realized that back in 2015 you made a game called Balance the Beam that is basically based on phone tape to a broomstick. So I'm not sure I got that perfectly correctly, but from what I get, it was made for the Alt Control Game Jam in 2015, and players have to use the broomstick to keep an interstellar portal open and save some spaceships coming on. I what I got from the video.
Yeah.
And you had this reflection like 6 years ago.
That's an interesting thing. Like I'm not sure like how the reflection was back then precisely. I don't remember, being very frank, but I do remember the thing, like for a long time making out controls for me was always making out controls at home. Like this is where I built them, right? Like there is this element of like this is the materials that I thought of engaging with, right? And this one, for instance, it's like I was like, yeah, like I have this broomstick lying around. I have my phone that is getting kind of old, so maybe it's okay if I strap it to the broomstick and play with it. Like I hopefully I can protect it well and so on. And one thing that I always considered a lot is like my knowledge of electronics and using them to build things I have learned a lot in the last few years. So using the smartphone was a way of playing to what I knew. So I knew how to make like apps using different tools kind of, and the phone has so many sensors, and the sensors are usually used to tracking us to gather metadata and sell us ads, but we can also use these to maybe playful ways. And particularly one thing that interests me a lot in smartphones is like, in Brazil, it's way more common to folks to have smartphones than personal computers, right? So they are like the most accessible computing device that we have, like, right, like in terms of the number of devices and people having access to them. And so in a way, like this was a way of creating this kind of dance-like balancing play using the broomstick, which is also very open-ended. So basically, like you keep the portal open by aligning the two dials and like the two wormhole portals or something like that. And then when they are aligned, the ships can go through, and you're keeping the ship, like you're keeping the portals open so more people can go through. And yeah, you do this by just moving the in different axes, and they slowly drift. So you have to keep constantly compensating for that. And music plays, and it's not quick. It was not meant to be like a game about like just like quick reflexes or something like that. But so it just like slowly drifts, and you can use the broomstick to do that. But then people would start performing with it, right? Like, so in the video, my friend Rubens is just like dancing, like really like spinning and doing like all these moves and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, like he probably didn't need it to do that. Like the level wasn't that speedy in any way. Like he was just enjoying like the possibility that it opened, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's a way that go for it.
Okay, that comes me. So that's a good segue to that segues smoothly to Gambiabo. But just before that, that reminds me of what you said earlier about how with in Alt Control there is this tendency to go for more open rules in the game, kind of like in outdoor and street games, like where you negotiate the rules. All in some board games too, you do this, like people are not playing Uno the way it should be played, and such. Everyone knows about this. So that's fun to see this happening in your work. But I think what's even more interesting is that actually accessibility is something that is at the heart of your work. It's obvious now that I think about it. Like, I mean, some of us Alt Control developers don't really care, me included, me first, actually, in making our work necessarily accessible. Like, I don't mind making a piece that will be played only on site and it's not accessible. And that's something that we find in your work. So Broomstick, it feels like a foreshadowing of what Gambiabo is. Maybe we should transition to Gambiabo at this point. So to put it very simply, it's a series of do-it-yourself game controllers. It's like open source Nintendo Lab, in a sense. I would present it that way, I guess. But maybe you can talk about it better than I would. I'm pretty sure you can.
Sure. Yeah, like I feel that there is yeah, I feel that I really like the idea of not having to like permanently change hardware, like electronics, in a way that kind of breaks them, because this is costly, right? Like taking like I don't have like disposable electronics necessarily around that I can just destroy, right? Like it's not always the case that that's an option, right? So I think that like the idea of finding non-destructive ways is interesting, right? Like in making sure that things can be like that, maybe you can reuse, maybe you can like find ways of extending the life of objects. So seeing, it's almost like like objects as being an installed base, right? Like if like all the keyboards that are around, are an installed base of this system that we can, all these different amazing things that we can create by extending these, right? Like by changing the way that these can be interacted with, and without necessarily destroying them or permanently changing them, right? Like in a way that can be maybe like I can take this and change in some other way in the future without like sticking to only one way of changing it. And also, I really like the idea that of centering of the idea that, okay, this is a very like open-ended way of building it. Like I didn't have like a super detailed, like pre-scored cardboard sheet with like PDF of how you print and all these precise measurements, because I don't know how your keyboard is, right? Like I don't know like how you find more comfortable to interact with your, how it's the best way for you to interact with your keyboard. And this is one way of doing it in a way that changes it into a spinning wheel. And this is the way that I built it. But these are, it's almost like kind of like focusing on what are the ways of like designing around like a key press in this particular kind of keyboard. So like with this particular mechanism. And if folks take this as a starting point to creating their own things, this is really exciting, right? This is what I'm what I find interesting about that. And also this idea that when a company like the size of Nintendo goes into cardboard DIY and starts doing things there, it has a huge weight in the sense that they start that the discourse starts to get centered around what Nintendo does or doesn't do, right? And Nintendo has a very, very stringent way of looking at intellectual property, of like patenting things, of like being very like strong-handed in how like they think of their platforms and so on. So part of Gambiabo was making controllers for games that would never be in a Nintendo platform, right? Or and kind of like saying a bit like cardboard modding, building of things. This should not be gate kept. Like it should be an accessible practice. It should be an approachable practice. Yeah. So that was like, and I'm like trying to like to continue working on that. Like I even have like my webcam, I can't really show, but I have like a wall of cardboard in my bedroom right now with just like tons of cardboard to continue building this kind of thing. I think it's a super interesting material that we can do so many cool things with it.
I mean, is there sort of, I mean, part of what this project is doing is, you know, when you've got something like Nintendo Labo, which, yes, it's made out of cardboard, yes, it's do it yourself at home, but it's also clean and the lines are pre-cut for you and they're straight and no gaffer tape required, no sellotape required, you know, and, you know, and it's sort of, it takes the DIY aesthetic, the DIY attitude, and cleans it up, cleans up the rough edges. You will always end up with the perfect product. And I guess, I mean, part of what I see in, you know, in the Gambiabo stuff is this embracing of messiness, of, you know, it's not about being cluttered. It's about just doing it. And I think, you know, that's something that to me speaks very strongly. I mean, is that something that speaks strongly to you as well?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, so the name of Gambiabo is based in a Brazilian word called gambiarra, which is this idea that it's about like design or a creation that is about like adapting to circumstances and finding ways of designing with what you have and creating with what you have and mediating things, which I think is really important, like mediating things with the materials at hand and in a way that it can be very provisional, it can be very like spontaneous, but it is also something that makes things possible, right? Like makes things so now they can happen, creates conditions, right? And I think that that's really important. And I think that that's the focus. Like I really like the aesthetic of it as well, but I think the aesthetic is almost like into a second, like it's maybe not the thing that I'm most interested in.
Right.
Right. Like
the aesthetic is like a consequence of the spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that there is an idea here of autonomy, right? Like of an extent of like, okay, now I figured out how to like try this steering wheel kind of thing. Okay, maybe I want to try something different, right? Like maybe I want to take this element and do something else. And I think the way that we frame these processes are really important. Like if I'm I think like bringing forward the fact that to me it's also very improvisational, like that this is also is a way of opening it, right? Like it's a way of not black boxing the design of this, right? So I designed this without using like a laser cutter to prototype it in a way, right? Because and it's not to say that it's not a valid way of prototyping things. It's super useful, it's super interesting, but it is also about like, okay, so how would I deal with this problem in a different set of constraints, right? And yeah, I think that that's important as well. Like I think that there is an element of like not yeah, I think that there is like I find it interesting to make mistakes when doing this.
Yeah.
Right. Like in this process and kind of yeah, I don't know. I think it at least to me, like this was a way to stay close to that.
Yeah, that's interesting that in Gambiabo, there are two games in one, in a sense. Like one is building the controller and the other one is the game you will play with the controller you build. The thing is, if the controller part is just based on a recipe, on a tutorial, then it's not play anymore. I mean, following a recipe is not the same as playing. Playing assumes that you will go through trials and errors and try to do stuff that maybe weren't planned to be done that way, and yet you still do them. When I follow a recipe or even follow a tutorial, Unity tutorial on YouTube, I don't feel like I'm playing. I'm just applying. And it's interesting in Gambiabo that you have these two games in one, not even mentioning the part where, of course, so people may not know because we didn't mention, but every resources for Gambiabo are available on GitHub, except the cardboard. You have to bring up your own cardboard. But you can, like at the end of the show, if you have some cardboard, you can play Gambiabo at home right now.
Yep. Yeah,
that's so cool.
But this question of like, but I do think, for instance, that this question of the two games of like how the playfulness of making the game or making the controller, I think this is something, for instance, that Nintendo Labo is very, very based on, but in this way of like more recipe focused, right? Like, and I think that there is an element. I saw the question about like is the making of the game itself a game? This is a very good question because there is the point of saying like if we think of game making in a broad sense, including the games industry and thinking of folks that are outside the industry as well, there is a whole set of answers for that, right? There are contexts where like making the game is a playful thing and some folks can engage with game making this way, often because of privilege, often because of where they're based and the position they're in, and other folks who are working on the games industry, like many different parts of it, are not in a playful kind of environment, right? It's it's work, and it's like in the sense of I really like it's not to say that folks who are doing more playful things are not working, but it's a very different approach to and a different way that these things are framed, right? And I think it's really important if we look at it globally to consider that, right? Like and how these roles get separated. And so there is this really interesting text that I find, a book that is really, really good by Ergin Bulut called where he talks about ludopolitics, and he talks about this question of like who can play and who has to work in the games industry, and kind of like talking about these inequalities and power imbalances and how these questions play out. And I think that in a way, like building the alternative controllers can be a way into exploring these questions more and thinking about like where is the hardware coming from, who is working to create them, who has to work when making hardware, and who gets to play at making hardware. And I think that these are also questions that when making out controls is a good thing to ask.
And to finish on the history interview part, and stay on this open source ideology, I will call it that way. I think it's close to it. You made a website a few years ago that's altcontrols.info, which is a website that I give to all of my students all the time. It's a wonderful website with a lot of open source or shareware, freeware resources related to alt control, related to how to make them from a design perspective, how to make them from a technical perspective. I strongly suggest people to go there. Maybe you can tell us at least quickly how you came up with the idea of making that. I mean, it was needed, of course, but was it the only motivation behind it?
I think well, one thing, I'm super glad that it's useful. Really glad that you're using it. And you also contributed things there. That's really great. Yeah. And thanks a lot for that. And but one thing that I really find like documentation and archives are really important. And so I really appreciate like Shake That Button as an archive of alt control games, and the way that it helps to preserve this history, and also to create like a common or like an approachable like set of references that we can talk about, that we can think about, that we can like base so many different things off of that. And often the question of how these get done is maybe more difficult to get through from there, right? Like, or even in game making in a broader sense, there is like a lot of like otherwise of open source and free software and free like courses and resources and so on. But there is also this tendency of closing things into marketplaces, so like asset stores and so on. And I felt like that it was an interesting thing to try to create like a list of resources that would be mostly open and mostly free if possible, in order to make to help folks have access to this. And also, like, I think this is also based on this kind of lists that you can find on GitHub of like awesome something. So awesome Godot, for instance, or awesome Unity or something like that. And it's usually like a list of links for different things about that specific topic. And I thought like, oh, let's try making one of these. And also like I was using these websites on a daily basis, right? Like I was always checking them and so on. And I felt like, yeah, it would be really cool, like for folks, this is something that could benefit more folks. So yeah.
And it does.
Yay.
So the transition is a bit abrupt, but I think you have things to show us, Alistair.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So Enric has brought with him something to show us. But before we move on to that, it is time for us to introduce our regular audience interaction segment. So at the end of the show, and Enric, I was looking worried briefly. I hope you're not too worried. We're going to be asking you, Enric, at the end of the show to come up with a concept for a new game or controller using objects suggested by the viewers. Yes, there's the terrified face I was expecting. So I am about to switch on the bot. And now that I have, when you in the chat type in a word or phrase beginning with an exclamation mark, that will get added to the pool of objects that we'll be asking Enric to come up with a controller made out of at the end of the show. Don't worry, it's just a concept. You don't have to actually physically build it in 5 minutes. So type in, yes, type in whatever you like. It could be !potato, for example. Tatiana's just added a kettle to the pool. Thank you very much. And at the end of the show, the bot will pick 5 random objects for us to work from. So let's have these suggestions roll in. And thank you everyone who is suggesting right now. Let's keep them coming.
Birimbau.
Birimbau.
No, I was just saying Birimbau is a cool one. I like it.
Yeah, I want this one too to be.
Well, we'll have to cross our fingers. So the next segment we want to go to is to see your wonderful creation that you've brought with you. So yes, you told us you brought with you something totally new yet before seen. Yeah. So what is this creation?
Yeah. It's this. Okay, so it's this thing.
Oh wow. Okay.
Right. And it's, well, I'll show the workings of it. So basically what this is a projector, right? For a smartphone. So there are a few designs around, like on YouTube and like and so on, but most of them have this problem of like having like a mirrored image and some other things. And this one is something that I'm working on together with my friend Pedro Paiva at Menos Play. Like I can post his tag there. And the idea is actually like we built this as a way of making street arcades.
Wow.
Right. So the idea is to use these to project games on surfaces and kind of like make and play games in like show games in different contexts without having to carry like a whole lot of machinery and so on. So it's basically, and how it works is here there is this little tray,
right?
And you can slip in. Like a phone here. So you make the tray the size of your phone.
Yeah.
Basically. And it's just by layering. So it isn't that like you just trace and cut the phone size.
Yeah.
And you put it back in here. Right. And when it's on, it will project the image through the overhead mirror, right, and through this like reading glass lens here.
Wow.
I don't know if you can see it well.
So I can see there is a lens. So it's like a reading glass, reflected in the mirror as well.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, and basically these are all like dollar store materials. So cardboard, dowels, some hot glue, and this shower mirror, basically. And then you use these, so you can project things on the wall with this. You can carry it around like very easily, which is the idea of the little handles and so on. And actually here, like the thing is like you have to adjust the focus. Right. So often like you have to like adjust in order to get like a good image on the wall. So for doing that, we actually have like small like rails here, like small slots cut on the sides.
Yeah.
And here there is like a screw with a nut embedded in cardboard.
Right.
So basically inside this little thing, there is a nut, like a metal nut.
Oh yeah, yeah, I can see that.
Just hot glued to the cardboard. And then you can use this to actually like fasten the position of the top part. So the top part slides. So you can adjust it by doing this.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I dismantled it. So you can adjust the focus by doing that.
That's incredible.
And after you put it back on, thanks. Then you can use that as like a portable projector and arcade thing. And then, so this is the Sistema Caixa Preta, as we called it for now, like it's a work in progress title, but it means like black box system. And the idea of this is like, yeah, it's very portable. You don't need a battery. You can use with almost any phone as long as it fits within the box. And then you can control the game either by connecting like a gamepad to the phone in here. There's a little slot here so you can actually fit in there, or like via Bluetooth gamepad, or I'm making a game for it actually, that where you're walking in the woods and you navigate it through like this magic lantern kind of play. So you move around like, and depending on where you project, it will show you a different part of the woods.
Oh, what? So is it's using the gyroscope in the phone to figure out what direction
it's using
pointing.
The compass.
Right.
Yeah,
oh, that's
it's using
amazing.
the compass. So it's based on like the northwest, south. And once you want to teleport to a new place or thing like that, you actually like hold this little tab here.
Right.
And this activates like the action. And what this tab does is it's actually blocking the proximity sensor of the phone. So the proximity sensor is the sensor that like turns off the screen when you put the phone close to your ear.
Right.
Like there is this small sensor there. So this is kind of blocking that.
Oh, that's
so
amazing.
You can use that as a switch, basically. So you can kind of like project in different walls in different locations and like interact with that. You can also shake it. Like I'm thinking of some interactions for that as well. But the idea is to use the sensors to navigate this little game by using this. And the idea is actually like you could extend it in different ways and so on. So it's open-ended.
Yeah.
And yeah, and part of the reason why we wanted to build this thing is to, well, it's an interesting thing to build lots of different things.
Yeah.
But there is this this idea as well that a lot of interactions with smartphones are very individualized, are very one-to-one, like one person to one device, and they often kind of emphasize this kind of center of attention around the device, and very like sometimes can be difficult to create some social things around it. So I don't know, like the idea was to kind of break it into this thing where you can't touch this, like you can't interact much with the screen while it's in the box, but you can use the sensors and you can like come up with different ways of playing with the smartphone.
Yeah.
But without
we have some questions from the chat. One is simple. It's where does the lens come from?
Oh, it's a dollar store reading glass that I just cut the handle with a hacksaw.
Okay.
So
and someone was asking if you will give people instructions on how to make this themselves.
Yes, that's the idea. The goal is to make like some instructions, like maybe like a video of building one for a specific device, so that can show like how you can adapt it to different devices. But yeah, the idea is to make it like make like a DIY set of how to build it and how to modify it, because lots of these things you don't need to do this same way. Like, so yeah.
I mean, the thing
that's incredible.
Yeah, the thing that you like, the idea of putting the phone in there and then sort of taking the way that you interface with the device, and that now the phone is no longer something that you look at and then no longer interact with the rest of the world. The phone is now something that you use to project a new world on top of the existing one. And I think that's such a fascinating idea, but I also think it kind of speaks to something that you were speaking about with Cook Your Way, which is the alternative controller as a way of rethinking how we bridge from from player to device, from user to device, where, with Cook Your Way, it's, you've given them this interactive stove to work with where, where it is not interacting in the way that a keyboard or a mouse or a controller would. So they have to think about that interaction. Here, it's almost like you're asking a very similar question, but like from the other direction, which is like, why can't a phone make you look outwards? I think that's fascinating.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
it reminds me of like boom boxes from the 80s and 70s, where the music was shared instead of in headphones and personal. And what you're doing basically is a video alt control boom box in the social sense of the boom box. I love this idea of reclaiming the streets and the social spaces. It's awesome.
Cool. Oh, I'm really glad. I love boom boxes as well. I think that there is this, and actually, like, one of the things that I want to make for change this one is find a way of like putting one of those speakers like hanging from it so that I can make more noise as well. and some of them actually work as like battery banks, which is really useful. But yeah, because it uses like full brightness, so it can use the battery pretty quickly. And the image is not super great. It's like it loses lots of contrast, lots of saturation, but I think it is a constraint that we can design in interesting ways, and we can create cool things based on that. And I like the idea of like, I don't know, painting this in different ways and like modifying it and like finding ways for it to be expressive and meaningful to how each person is going to be using this. So, and I think that there is like, and I'm not like, I didn't come up with like projectors, like DIY projectors made of cardboard by myself. Like there are lots of projects around, like there's lots on YouTube as well. So this in a way is like, it's saying like, hey, like building on this and like adding a little bit and making sure that it continues to be open. Yeah, this is something that I find is a cool, so it's a way of keeping that going. And yeah, and trying to find like a few ways of fixing. So the overhead thing, I'm really happy with it. It works pretty well. It's a nice little thing.
Yeah, the novelty is not so much about making a projector for a phone, but the social experience that comes from it. And I mean, it's fascinating. When do you think you will be able to put the instructions to make it online?
Oof, I don't know. I'm like, no, PhD writing and so on, but it's kind of like, but I hope to, because we've been, we started working on this last year, me and Pedro, and we really wanted to get it going before an event that Peteca, an organization in Brazil, was making, called Brazil Game Show, which was the idea of making like this like self-organized, like grassroots like event about games in Porto Alegre. It's going to be, but then with the pandemic, that changed, and it kind of like, in a way, like we just are waiting like for a moment for that. Yes, so I don't know, like hopefully sometime this year. Like it's not now, it's done, so it's more about making this documentation. So hopefully soonish,
before Christmas.
Yeah, probably. I hope so.
Yeah, well, I know what I'll be making all my friends and family for their Christmas this year. Well,
so do we have enough words?
I think we do have. We have had an absolute cavalcade of words. I have to count them up afterwards. But thank you, everyone who's typed into chat. We've had a lot of interesting stuff coming in. So I guess if Enric, are you ready? Are you ready?
I think so.
All right. Well, when I press the button, we will reveal the 5 objects that the bot has selected for you to work with, and you will have about 5 minutes to come up with an idea for a new controller. You're allowed to bounce ideas off of us and chat to that, and basically however you feel is right for you. But
okay,
without
let me get a piece of whiteboard here. Right.
Okay, well, without further ado, I shall reveal the 5 selected objects from chat are paper, Mr. Lagostera, which I assume refers to yourself, but could refer to another Mr. Lagostera, a friend, a relation perhaps. A human chain, a kettle, and a candle. So that's...
Do all of these need to be involved?
The birimbau is not in the selection.
I mean,
I'm
we
so
could
sad
add
for
it
that.
just for fun. If you're...
No, but it's already a lot.
It's already too much, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
okay, so let me see if I get it right.
Yep.
Mr. Lagostera, so probably my dad. Kettle, human chain, and
Paper,
was there another one?
Kettle and a candle.
Paper, Mr. Lagostera, human chain, kettle, and candle. That's not an easy. That's not an easy one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm thinking of the candle and ways to turn it off, like to extinguish the fire. Maybe. Well, my father is a like a mechanical engineer that works with, like, used to teach about thermodynamics. Okay. So maybe kettle and candle could be something about like warming things up and transferring heat around things. This got me thinking that a human chain, like heat, is about like particles moving faster or slower, right? This is, and maybe the heat here could be movement around the human chain. So people moving faster in one area and slower in another. Maybe kettle and candle could be like could be the 2 different speeds of the game, maybe, or the 2 different states that. So the candle is a softer one, and the kettle could be like a faster kind of way of symbolizing it. I'm not thinking of the object so much. I'm thinking of what the object is doing, right?
Yeah. But I guess, the candle is slow and gentle and soft. The kettle is hard and it's bubbling, and that it makes a noise as well.
Yeah, but the paper is not there yet. So, and I guess, well, I could get my dad to referee the whole thing. I think he could be like participating somehow, or like it could be something like the like those like Ace Attorney, like kind of could be like Mr. Lagostera's apostrophe and then the name of the game kind of thing. Yeah, like instead of like the Sid Meier's Pirates or something, it could be like Mr. Lagostera, something like that.
I mean, there is something interesting there. Is that if your father's like, your father is maybe the protagonist of this experience, but not necessarily the player, which is kind of, do you know what I mean? Like they.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it could be something about like. Figuring out some kind of secret message based on where the movement is going, or like how the heat is transferring between all these folks.
That's nice. I like that.
Maybe something like that. And then like the role of, I'm like, what's the role of my father in this? I have to show him. I hope he's watching.
Is the judge of thermodynamics?
Yeah, like checking it. No, this thermodynamics is not going well. No, I'm kidding.
I think there's something in that, though. I think there is something. If his role is to catch people moving wrong or something. Do you think?
Oh yeah, like noticing like if it's more like kettle than candle, and kind of like, yeah, it could be almost like an MC role, right? Like the
Yeah.
master of ceremonies kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, there could be paper could be used for signaling, or like it could be like yeah, I'm just like seeing things as almost like this kind of new games movement kind of game
Right.
where, oh, the conductor, that's a good idea there in the chat, and
Oh.
and something like exploring that kind of thing. Well, what else? Well, another idea maybe could be also one of those games like uh something else, like kind of comparison games, like, or cattle or a candle or something like that. I don't know.
Or what?
This is a tricky set of things.
Yeah,
I
you
don't
have
know.
a set
Um,
that is so hard.
See, I don't know. Oh, go.
yeah. No, I was going to say like human chain could be made out of paper, right? Like one of those like classic
Ah.
like paper cut things
Yeah.
of like little people, like, and you could make something out of that. But then where does the boiling water come in? Yeah, not sure. But yeah, maybe I think like the human chain with lots of folks and kind of like trying to get movement to move around, to go into different locations, and maybe there is like a goal, like if you get to boiling water temperatures, or like, because then there would be like kettle is one level, but also the candle can be higher up
Oh.
because it's a higher temperature to
I mean,
burn paper.
we don't necessarily
Yeah,
need.
kettle could be used as a timer.
Oh, that's nice. That's a clever idea. I
That's a
like
good
that.
idea.
Oh,
I mean, I was thinking there's
Yeah, yeah,
nothing that says we need to obey the laws of physics here. So if the
yeah.
people in the chain could move enough fast enough to, to become the temperature of boiling water, then, maybe that's
yeah.
how the kettle and the human chain come together, perhaps.
Could be. There could be like a very dangerous version of this game where you pass a kettle around,
Yeah.
but then it's like not the best thing to do. Pass the kettle before it boils up. But but it could be an empty kettle, and the water could be symbolic, and it'll be a less dangerous
Right.
kind of game. And electron dance, yeah.
So,
The
I mean, we are starting to run towards the end of the time. So, would you be able to maybe wrap up? What's your favorite of the ideas, or just like throw together all your favorite bits and see what they come up with, or is there one grounding idea you've kind of that you like most of all?
okay, I think like my favorite one would be like ask my father to MC the event by calling out loud which state the chain is in.
Right.
Is it like the kettle state or candle state, and the goal of people like in the human chain at that moment is to kind of like heat up all the way to kettle temperature or be soft as a candle, and then like, I don't know, my father would like MC the whole thing and like tell folks how they did, like how amazing they were as a kettle or as
that sounds beautiful. I mean, it's got a lovely warm kind of like new games movement kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
That sort of, there's no clear win or lose. It's really about moving like a kettle. I love it.
Yeah. I like that. I like the idea of, and there's also the time. Maybe with more time, like maybe we could come up with some way of. I really like the idea of the time that takes for water to boil, like the kettle as a timer idea. I like that. Like so often it becomes the way to break a bit. Like, oh, I'm gonna make some tea. The time of the kettle. I kind of like that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's wonderful. That's such an awesome pitch for a really hard set of objects, I think.
Yes. But perhaps it might be, just polish it up a wee bit and maybe it'll be at next year's IndieCade festival. So, watch this space. But yes, we are reaching the point where we are about time to head off. But this has been it's been a fantastic night with you, and really thank you very much for coming along. Is there anything that you would like to add before we head off? Anything that you'd like to say, or maybe anything really?
Well, out of the top of my head, the first thing that comes is fora Bolsonaro, and hope that we can get that genocidal president out of Brazil as soon as possible. But that's always the first thing that comes to mind. But second thing is, yeah, like I'd love for folks to experiment with the ways they engage with games and experiment with like the different hardware that they have available, or maybe start creating some DIY things. It would be really amazing. And actually, like if anyone who's watching would be interested in contributing resources to the resource list, that would be really amazing, because it would be really cool to get more folks to know about different resources. I think it would be really great. So if anyone has any ideas, you can go to altcontrols.info, and there are many different ways there to contribute. And that would be really cool.
Fantastic. Yes, please do. That would be fantastic. So before we move on, just a little notice about the upcoming program from IndieCade. So coming up this June is the IndieCade Horizons event from June the 12th to June the 13th. August 21st to 22nd is the Indie Exchange Developers Summit. And then in October, from October 22nd to the 24th, we have the IndieCade Festival. So keep your eyes peeled for those, and I guess tickets and all of the required things will be on the IndieCade website. Next week, Beyond Screens is back. It takes place every Wednesday here on the IndieCade channel, and next week's show is Playable Theatre with Celia Pierce. So please do come along for that, because it is always a fascinating discussion. I move back to the three of us to say our final cheerios. So thank you very much, Henrik, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I think it was really, really great. I hope that folks enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
Fantastic.
So did we. That was awesome to have you here. Thanks so much, Henrik. Thanks again to the audience as usual. And I think we can wrap this up.
All right. Cheerio, everyone. Have a good day or a good night wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Bye.